कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Welcome to Kitabnama, Books and Beyond. We are here today with our guest, Gavin Francis. He is a doctor as well as an award-winning travel writer. His book, Empire Antarctica, won the Scottish Book of the Year award, and he has also written another book called True North, both of which we'll be discussing today. Welcome, Gavin, to our show.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
You've been to the Himalayas before, you mentioned. Could you tell us a little bit about your travels in the Himalayas? And you also said you're planning to write about it.
Yeah, I've made some trips before to the foothills, hill stations when I've been traveling in India. I've also traveled through the Karakoram, up the Karakoram Highway, in Nepal, also in Tibet and Lhasa. So I have a deep affection for this part of the world, and I'm very fascinated by the ways that the different peoples who live in the Himalaya and the Trans-Himalaya have certain similarities even across enormous distances.
You spent 18 months in Antarctica, in a base camp that we hear is more difficult to get out of than an international space station during the winter. How is it living in Antarctica, and why did you decide to go there?
Well, Antarctica has a very special place, I think, in the human imagination. It's a continent which is very, very unusual. It's a continent with almost nothing growing. It's an enormous continent. It's mostly ice. No one owns it. It has scientific research stations where scientists from all different countries work in cooperation, but it's also extremely remote. And the station where I worked for 10 months of the year, you couldn't get in and out, really. There's just a brief period over the summertime when it was possible, and the sea was melted enough for ships to come in and out. I wanted to experience that simplicity and that very pure landscape. And the only way to do it really was to get a job there. And then that entailed having to spend just over a year there.
Could you talk a little bit about your routine in Antarctica? Like, what was your day like for those 18 months?
Well, Antarctica is so vast that it varies in terms of whether you're in the northern part or a southern part, what kind of light you have. My station was called Halley. It was 75 degrees south. And there we had 3.5 months of constant sunlight in the summer and 3.5 months of constant darkness in the winter. And in the winter, the temperatures can get down to about -50, -55 degrees Celsius. And so the daily pattern varied enormously depending whether it's summer or winter. The summertime, it's a bit busier. There was 60 people on base and there was a lot going on, a lot of science projects, 24 hours a day, taking advantage of the daylight. There are atmospheric scientists studying the clean air. There were climate change specialists analysing the weather. There were people who study the magnetic field of the earth, lots of projects. And as the doctor on the base, I had to be there in case anybody became ill, but also could get involved and help people. The winter time is very, very different. It's dark for 3.5 months. The base only has 14 people on it rather than 60. And every day, there are no time givers from the outside world. You know, the sun is never going to come up and tell you the morning has come. And so you have to develop a very strict routine, keep yourself to a certain clock. And I developed a routine of when I would get up, when I would eat. Every day I made sure I exercised outside. I used to go skiing in the darkness round and round to keep myself fit. And people ask, wasn't that a terrible time being there in the winter? But actually it's one of the most beautiful times because the very darkness means that you can see the stars. You're treated to this wonderful sight of seeing the constellations turn through all the 24 hours rather than just the brief glimpses we get of them night and day here in the north. Also, you see meteor showers and auroras. Auroras are a daily occurrence there. They happen very regularly. So there's always a lot to watch in the night sky of winter, a very beautiful time.
You also had the fortune of living with penguins, with emperor penguins, you said. Could you tell us a little bit about that? You tracked them for about a year.
Yeah, well, when I was living there, I was very drawn to the local colony of emperor penguins because they were the only representative of life, really. The landscape is so pure and elemental. There's just ice and sky. There are no rocks, thousands of miles to the nearest neighbour. But there was this colony of emperor penguins, one of the largest colonies on the continent, a few kilometres from the base. And so I would go and sit with them and watch them through their year. And they have a terrible life. Apsley Cherry Garrard, who was one of the explorers with Scott, he wrote that he didn't think there was anything on Earth that had a worse life than an emperor penguin. And they really do. They stand out in this weather for much of the year. The male penguins fast for 4 months continuously because the sea ice is too thick for them to access fishing grounds. And it takes them 9 or 10 months to fulfill their breeding cycle. So they only have a couple of months a year where they're free of their grueling breeding cycle.
It's very interesting that you also use mythology in your books. In True North, you combine history, mythology, as well as travel writing. How did your interest in mythology come up, and how have you used that in your travel writing? Because it's a very unique sort of combination.
I think I'm fascinated by the way that human beings, human communities imagine the world around them. And our environment shapes us. Our cultures, our human cultures are very much shaped by the landscapes that we live in, and the landscapes impose certain things on us, such as here in Bhutan, you know, the fields are very steeply terraced. There are only certain months of the year you can grow crops. There's very difficult access across much of the country. All these things have helped shape the culture, the culture of a mountain people with certain patterns and traditions of trade, certain beliefs about spirits and aspects, essentially of the human imagination that they project onto the world around them. And similarly, the same thing I discovered in exploring the European Arctic, the north, everything. When you go north of Great Britain, you find the Shetland Islands, Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, Svalbard, Lapland, and I made a tour of these places and was interested to see the similarities across these very different communities. The similarities which are essentially born out of the fact that they're struggling against a similar harsh environment.
You balance both professions, being a doctor as well as being a travel writer. So I assume that your profession as a doctor must influence your profession as a writer and vice versa. So, I mean, you are trying to fuse the two in your next book. So could you tell us about your next book, because it sounds fascinating?
I feel very much, I like the way of approaching landscape travel writing, where you attempt to look at the history of a place, the way that people have adapted, evolved to live with it, its stories, its myths. People who live in a certain landscape, that landscape becomes sacred to them in a sense. They have it becomes charged with meaning and charged with resonance and even reverence. And what I'm trying to do is use those ways of approaching travel writing and apply them to the human body, because essentially the human body is like a landscape in many ways. And as a doctor, I'm constantly confronted by surprises, new things that I've never come upon. But at the same time, the body is a landscape that I'm very acquainted with. You know, I know the anatomy, and through all my years of practice, I've got to know a great many patients and dealt with a great many problems. And so sometimes embarking on a clinic, and I see 40 names on the computer screen, I don't know what they're going to say. They could be people who are have a sore toe. There could be people who are hoping to get pregnant. There could be people who are hearing voices in their head that frighten them. People can come to me with anything. And so starting out in a clinic can in many ways be like starting out on a journey in which some aspects of it will be familiar and some aspects of it won't be familiar. And so what I'm doing is I'm writing a book which essentially takes different parts of the body and it explores them as I would explore them as a travel writer, taking an aspect of them and breaking it down and looking at its meaning, the meaning of that part of the body when it fails us. And and how we can sometimes be brought down by our bodies and how sometimes we can transcend them. You did ask me when that project is likely to come to fruition. I will finish it later this year, and then it should be out next summer. And it's to be called Adventures in Human Being, because I feel like as a doctor, sometimes just my medical practice is like going on an adventure. I never know where I'm going to end up.
So, having been to so many places, I'm just wondering, you must have a certain expectation when you go to a place, and you sort of know maybe what to, look forward to, what to anticipate. So, has there been any place that has surprised you or shocked you in a good way or in a bad way?
I mean, I grew up in southeast Scotland. I still live there now. My family are there. I also have family connections in Italy, and I travel back and forward to Italy quite a lot. But like I was talking about, the body can be almost like a sacred landscape. Well, the landscape that you grew up with can become very charged with meaning for you. And although I've visited places around the world which are similar, nowhere else really feels like home, because it's not the place where I grew up. No, I'm very settled there as long as I can travel, as long as I have the opportunity to travel.
Have you ever thought about venturing into other genres of writing? Because you have established yourself as a travel writer, but do you think you will ever, say, venture into fiction?
Yeah, no, I feel that what I want to do with my writing is explore the world, but the world includes the human body, so that my new book is part of that too. I want to explore the world and its possibilities, and it's not that I am against the idea of writing fiction, it's just that I feel there's still so many things that I have left to explore through non-fiction. And so, I've made a lot of journeys in the Himalayas, and I've made a start on a book about the Himalayas. I'd love to finish that. I made a journey with my wife from Scotland to New Zealand by motorcycle. It took us a year and a half, and it was wonderful. We passed through so many countries. I would love to write a book about that. So these are all ideas for the future, things that I would like to be able to use those experiences to gather and show certain aspects of what I enjoy about the world, what I enjoy about being able to explore the world, and offer them to readers if they want to go along on those journeys too.
We know how influenced you are by J.D. Salinger, so I want to ask you a little bit about that. What is it about Salinger that influences you so much? And have there been other influences on you?
Yeah, so many people I think have been influenced by Salinger. He's just got a wonderfully economical way of describing situations in human dramas, using simple language. He doesn't use an ornate vocabulary. He's very concise, and he's also just talks a lot of sense. There's that wonderful line in Seymour, an introduction, where he advises an aspiring writer just to write the book they most want to read. He says it's very simple. You've been a reader long before you're a writer. You must write the book you want to read, and it's wonderful advice. Other influences. In terms of my own writing as a non-fiction travel writer of sorts, people more in the nature writing tradition are a huge influence on me. People like Annie Dillard in the United States. In the British context, Bruce Chatwin's narratives, his travel narratives as well as his fiction is always surprising. He always comes at things from an unexpected angle, and I love that. Yeah, I'm always learning, always new influences. As I say, I'm a reader first, and when I write, I'm trying to create something that would give me enthusiasm to read.
Tell us about your connection with India. What do you feel about the country? Have you been here before? What is it about the country that's fascinated you the most?
It's a big question. India is a big place. I've been in India before. I spent 6 months traveling once before, and even 6 months is not a long time to see a country as vast, as diverse, as complex as India. My experience in India, I've travelled mostly around Himachal Pradesh, Ladakh, a little bit in Jammu Kashmir. Also, I've been down to Varanasi, Delhi, of course, and also in the south, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. India is just such, for somebody from Europe, it's very difficult to get an understanding, a comprehension of how this diverse state can be one state, but it's wonderful. The differences between Jammu Kashmir and Tamil Nadu are like the differences between Icelanders and Greeks. But in Europe we have many, many countries. My experience of it is that I always enjoy traveling here very much. I would like to come and be able to do more in the future, because there's that diversity and because there's a real spirit, I have felt a real spirit of tolerance and interest in lots of different kinds of people, which in other vast countries I've not noticed so strongly. Also geographically it's wonderful to be able to go from the Great Himalaya to tropical coastlines, palm-beached coastlines, and from the tea-growing valleys in the east to the Thar Desert in the west. People talk when you meet often North Americans, Americans who don't travel outside the United States, they say, why should we? We have so much to see here in the United States. And I feel like that about India. Indians would have no need of traveling. They've got such incredible places to visit within their own country.
You said that you really value the silences when you go on these journeys, and it's almost like a pilgrim's journey where your soul is recharged, is what you were talking about this morning. So do you feel like it's a spiritual journey for you when you go to these different places?
In a sense, I suppose it's a spiritual journey when you go to a very austere or remote landscape. Even if you're not following any particular spiritual tradition, essentially what you're doing is you're trying to go somewhere where there are a few distractions, where there might be a very simple landscape, which is beautiful, and which reminds you of the enormity of the planet, the powers that are much more powerful than you are. And you can gather a lot of strength from that, I think. And just as there's a tradition in pilgrimage of almost testing yourself, putting yourself through an experience which is difficult in order to learn something about yourself, something of value you can then take back to your daily life with your job and your family, and I think journeys to austere or very harsh regions like that, there's an element of that in why I do them. I think there's an element of wanting to go to a place in order to feel how you respond to that place and what's essential about your own nature, and it's kind of shown up by the very blankness of these blank landscapes.
So which place have you felt most culturally compatible with? You've been to so many different places, you have been to every continent on the planet. So which place have you most felt compatible with?
Every place surprises me. I know that maybe sounds like too neat a response, but yeah, I have the expectations when I go somewhere, but just like as I alluded earlier, there's always something in a clinic which I didn't expect. And someone will come out with a story I've never heard before. And similarly, when I travel, there's some countries where you might go expecting something, or people might have a reputation for being quite brusque or cold, and you find the opposite. You find them very warm. Countries that I've been very surprised by. India is endlessly surprising, of course. Turkey, I love traveling in Turkey. Again, huge country, very diverse people, wonderful changing landscapes. Much of the Middle East I found surprising. There's still a lot of the planet that I've not seen. There's a lot of places I would still like to go. And I'm always looking forward to finding out something new about the planet that I have these few decades to live on. And having the opportunity to go on learning more and more about it, getting acquainted with it more and more, even if it's just in the most fleeting ways. I'm under no illusions that I really get to know a place when I'm traveling through it. Even as I said, 6 months in India is nothing. So I just want to get acquainted, learn a little bit more about as many places as I can.
So if there was one place that you could go to and that you haven't been to before, which one would that be for you?
Culturally, I'm most compatible with Europe, with Northern Europe, because that's the environment I was brought up in. Scotland has a very long tradition of looking to the European continent for its education, for training its intellectuals and its professionals. England too. And so if I had to say that I was part of a tradition, then yeah, I mean, I'm a European. I'm a Northern European, and it's, sometimes when I'm traveling and I meet other Western travelers, and people from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, who come from economies that superficially might be similar to my own, I still sometimes feel that I end up having more in common with the Europeans because of this tradition, a very particular tradition to do with the evolution of our education systems and the outlook on the world that you have when you come from a very small country surrounded by lots of other very small countries, which is very different from the perspective of a Canadian or an Australian who come from these vast countries that they could never compass, you know. Scotland, I live in Edinburgh. Glasgow is the other city. It's only 40 miles away. One is on the east coast, one is on the west coast. It's a very small country. So yeah, I'm culturally I understand most those cultures that also have that kind of experience and those sorts of traditions. But that doesn't mean that I only want to travel in Europe, of course, you know. It just means I've got more to learn from other places.
Gavin, thank you so much for being with us today. It was fascinating to hear about your experiences, your travels, and we really look forward to your next book.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Rajasthan's beloved writer Vijaydan Detha, popularly known as Bijji, put his remote village Borunda on the international map. He passed away on the 10th of November 2013 at the age of 87.
साहित्य और कलम की ये जिम्मेवारी है कि वो मनुष्य को भीतर से समृद्ध करे, विकसित करे, उसका उत्कर्ष करे। ये जिम्मेवारी सबसे बड़ी है। जो मनुष्य इंसान होता जा रहा है, वापस मनुष्य को मनुष्य बनाए, ये साहित्यकार और कलम की जिम्मेवारी है। इसका विकल्प दूसरा कोई नहीं ले। एक लेखक के नाते मेरी सबसे पहली और आखिरी तमन्ना यही है कि मेरा मगज मेरे पेट की खुराक न बने, शरीर का राजा मस्तिष्क मेरे पेट का गुलाम न बने। ज़रूरत पड़ने पर शरीर का गोश्त नोच नोच कर पेट की अंतड़ियों के हवाले कर दूं और किसी भी कीमत पर अपने अक्षरों और अपनी कलम को गिरवी न रखूं। मेरी कमर झुक जाए पर मेरी कलम न झुके। मेरे अक्षरों को धन की लालसा न हो, मेरे शब्दों को सत्ता का भय नहीं हो, मेरी रचना में यश की बू नहीं हो। लेखक का सबसे बड़ा श्रेय यही है। बात बहुत बड़ी है, मेरा हौसला बहुत छोटा है, मेरी क्षमता बहुत नगण्य है। अपने सुने हुए और पढ़े हुए हर शब्द से ये आशीर्वाद चाहता हूँ, मेरी टेक निभाएं। बड़ा लेखक न बन सकूँ न सही, अच्छा नहीं लिख सकूँ न सही, न ज़्यादा नहीं लिख सकूँ न सही, लेकिन लेखक की मर्यादा को न तोड़ूं, शब्दों के गौरव को लांछित न करूं। बस इतनी ख्वाहिश है। आज की तमन्ना तो यही है। कल का कोई भरोसा नहीं, किंतु जिस दिन भी मेरा ये भरोसा टूटे, मेरे अक्षरों, तुम उसी क्षण मेरा गला घोंट देना। यदि इसमें ढील कर दी तो मेरी बदली हुई हैवानियत तुम्हारा ही गला घोंट देगी। तुम्हारे ही गौरव को बेचकर मैं अपना गुजारा नहीं करना चाहता। तुम्हारी हत्या करके मैं अपनी ज़िंदगी बसर नहीं करना चाहता। मुझे लेखक नहीं बनना है, लेखक की मर्यादा का पालन करना है।
Bijji lives on through the akshar, the words that have remained his unfailing companions.